Okay, I think we're live. All right, everybody. Welcome to the special edition of the Bet the Close podcast with FF Metrics. I'm joined alongside Chris Bilello and RC Fischer of FF Metrics. I'm AndrewDFS, and today we're going to be breaking down the divisional round games. Guys, before we get in, anybody shocked that both NFC East teams are no longer in the playoffs?
But I mean, it was not my expectation, but I will say from the podcast I was able to listen to so far this week, I was more surprised at how everyone reacted to the results of last week, treating the results of the games that happened like, oh, of course that was going to happen. Of course Tampa Bay was going to beat Philadelphia. They're terrible. Of course Dallas was going to choke. There was no thought or talk of Dallas losing to Green Bay before the games last week. You could listen to the podcast a week ago and look at the fact that the line never moved. Tampa Bay wasn't an easy bet. You know, it was a good bet if you had it, but it wasn't an easy bet. So I think that it's interesting right now to look ahead to this week's games. And people will say, well, this week's games are hard. Last week's games were easy. Last week's games weren't easy before they were played. Although we did very well on this show last week, it wasn't easy. It went our way, and we didn't have really an opinion on Dallas Green Bay, where the biggest upset happened.
They were not surprised by any of those things, and in between writing about how not surprised they were about Green Bay and Philadelphia, they were writing articles about how they knew C.J. Stroud was better than Bryce Young all along as their post-mortem for the season.
So not only was he better than Bryce Young all along, but NRC, I don't even know.
And they knew it.
You may agree or disagree with this, but I thought it was interesting that it was on Adam Schefter's podcast where he was saying, Bryce, C.J. Stroud is top 5 quarterback in the league. They had him. And specifically, he said he's better than Joe Burrow. And I thought, okay, but maybe in your scouting he is, but I don't think so. I actually think, and we can get into it, we get into the game, they obviously had a great year, credit to him, but they also didn't play a killer schedule. And that's what usually happens when you have this kind of a breakout season. The schedule corrects itself and things change. So, I mean, if I were a fan of the Texans, I'd be thrilled to have C.J. Stroud. I mean, I'm a Viking fan. No, nothing wrong with Kirk Cousins except that he takes up half the salary cap. But I'd be thrilled to have this guy. But it's just that jumping to that Stroud is better than Burrow, and that Stroud and Love, and this was said, Stroud and Love are the future of the league.
That seems like a pretty big leap to me. To even put Stroud and Burrow in the same sentence is, I don't know, that doesn't sound right. But before we're going to dive into that game first, but before we do that, just want to remind the listeners, go check out Chris's podcast on Spotify, Bet the Close, subscribe to it, rate it, whatever, feedback's a gift. And check out RC's site, ffmetrics.com, for the best stats in the game, handicapping commentary, fantasy football projections, and everything you want related to football content you can find on that site. So, gentlemen.
And NFL draft scouting time. It's my time to shine. And the first scouting reports have hit the site. So just putting that out there. It's NFL draft time, but it's also playoff time.
Yeah.
And C.J. Stroud is a top 5 quarterback. Go ahead.
Wow.
I know, so I'm that's what I was saying. I didn't see your comment on that, and I thought he very well could be, but I lumped that in with all of the extreme reactions because I didn't hear anyone saying C.J. Stroud was a top 5 quarterback before last week, but this was a big win, and so was the Colts game. And I'm not anti C.J. Stroud. I was just interested to hear how overly enthusiastic everyone was about the things that were right in front of their face from the games that just happened this week. And it just so happened Burrow had a bad year and he's home. But if he was in these playoffs, then maybe it wouldn't be so easy to say Stroud is better. And finally, just to the draft part of the discussion, we've had a great run the last several years with all the great research from RC, Ross, everybody in the FFM family, Xavier, turning that into betting opportunities. So that stuff will be on the website, and that stuff will be recorded in Bet the Close shows as well.
Awesome. We're all looking forward to that. And let's get through the playoffs first, and then we'll start.
Yeah, first we got to
entertaining
make some
ourselves.
money on the playoffs like we
Yeah.
did last week.
Well,
Yeah,
all the easy
exactly.
games were last week, so I think we just wait for the draft to make
Yeah.
some more money.
All right, guys. First game on the slate. We can talk as much CJ Stroud as you like. We have the Texans going into Baltimore, which is actually a rematch of week 1. The Ravens are favored by 9.5. I saw some sites at 10 as well, and the total here is 43.5. The big question is, can CJ Stroud continue this crazy run, this insane rookie season, and actually upset the number 1 seed Baltimore Ravens at home?
I'm going to recuse myself because every time I talk about the Baltimore Ravens, I am wrong. So I am not betting on this. I am not betting for or against anybody in this game. I am going to be highly interested to see how well Stroud does against a much better defense in non-ideal conditions weather-wise. If he goes out and pulls this game off at Baltimore as a rookie in that weather, I mean, it's going to be a serious conversation. I don't think he's better than Joe Burrow because I think Joe Burrow's the best in the game, but the list then goes to CJ Stroud number 2 if he pulls this game off. I mean, he may be number 2 already in my mind going forward, but if he pulls this game off, that's going to be a huge thing for his resume going forward. Not that he has anything to prove, and not that he's not going to be great going forward, but man, as a rookie to go pull this thing off with that offensive line, that would be unbelievable.
My challenge with the upset here is not that I don't believe in Stroud and the offense, even with the bad offensive line. My question is the defense for Houston, because it's kind of the same thought I have with Tampa Bay too, even though I think Tampa Bay's got a better defense. When you win that first game at home and go on the road, when you think about the teams that have done that historically, they've got pretty good defenses. And so I would throw it back to you guys and just to talk a little bit about Houston's defense, because I did hear this week that they've only played one offense that was ranked in the top 10 based on DVOA all year, and that was Baltimore week 1. You know, the best offense they played besides, I think it was Tampa Bay, was the next highest ranked offense that the Houston defense played against. So I know they played well the last several weeks. I mean, I would say that holding down Indianapolis at Indianapolis is pretty good, but even the way that game ended seemed like more of Indianapolis failing than Houston succeeding, and it was in a dome. Mm-hmm. So your thoughts on that? The Houston defense is really, I'm always looking at the underdog. I'd love a big upset, and I'd love to see this rookie quarterback run all the way through the playoffs, but it's the defense that I have questions about.
And for our listeners, it's expected to have 17-mile-per-hour winds in Baltimore on Saturday, and it's going to be cold, I think, in the 20-degree range. So Stroud's a dome court. I mean, he plays for a team that home field is in a dome, obviously, and on the road, Stroud's, he lost to the Jets. That was a pretty big loss, 30-6, but he also lost to the Panthers as well earlier in the season. So there is some evidence here that the Texans don't play as well on the road, just like any other team. But my fear is that they're not going to be able to adjust to this colder weather and the fact that Baltimore's coming off a bye week and they have a pretty good defense. That's what scares me away from the Texans.
The Houston defense is very Jekyll and Hyde. In the beginning of the year, you could run all over them, but they had a really nice pass defense, part of it being everybody would run on them, so they weren't giving up the pass game numbers. Then about halfway through later in the season, it flipped, and all of a sudden they were stopping everybody on the ground, and you could throw all over them. Then Jonathan Taylor went off on them, and reverse the reverse course. So every time I think I've got a beat on the Houston defense that has some good aspects to it and has played some good games, and D'Amico Ryans calls some interesting games, just when I think they may be starting to break out, then they turn and flop and get walloped by somebody, and it has to be a shootout for CJ Stroud, which if this game was in a dome, if this was at Houston, I would be chomping at the bit to take the Texans to win straight up. But outside, 2 weeks off, Baltimore, I don't think they can pull off this upset. And that defense is part of the reason. The Baltimore defense has been pretty rock steady. The Houston defense has been all over the place.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, I don't think it was when we were together. I think it was a conversation I was having with myself on a solo podcast talking about the Ravens and how they remind me a little bit of, or at least they made the comment after they beat Miami. And I think similarly when they beat San Francisco, although I consider San Francisco a little more physical than Miami, that they're the physical team, and they take pride in beating up on these teams who play basketball on grass, where it's just speed, no physicality. And my thought was, okay, it's almost like the Atlanta Brave teams who won 110 games because they had Maddox, Glavine, and Smoltz during the regular season. But once you get to the postseason, everyone's got good pitchers. And the analogy obviously would be then that when you get to the playoffs, you're playing a physical team, and the Ravens' advantage that they've had in the regular season goes away. I think they drew a good opponent from that standpoint. I don't think Houston is that physical team. I would be more scared for Baltimore if you had a team coming in with a good defense and less of an offense than this Houston team. This Houston team, I said it before last week on the show we did together, that it feels like the winner of I kind of felt like Cleveland was the team that could, everything played out well where they'd get Baltimore. I think Baltimore caught a break getting Houston, but unless Stroud is otherworldly and Lamar is playoff Lamar.
And that's the Lamar that, everybody has in their mind, how he pretty much can't get it done during the playoffs. I think one stat that I saw being thrown around a lot on a lot of podcasts is when he's a heavy favorite, I think 7.5 or more, like in this situation, he's 1-8 against the spread. And the only win that he got was actually week 1 against Houston too. So that was a little interesting to me. So the question is, do we fade that? Do we ignore that? Or do we trust this Texans team that clearly does not play as well on the road as opposed to on at home? And the defense there is sort of like the opposite of what we saw with the Browns, where the Browns D kind of needed that bad weather to like play up to their potential almost. The Texans need that, I feel like, need that indoor stadium for them to play well, at least on defense.
Yeah, they don't strike me as a team that it was impressive what they did to go on the road and get a win. But I will say this about the weather too. I feel like with a lot of these games, the weather is maybe 95% of the time blown out of proportion just to get people's attention and make it extreme. Now you guys know that, and I mean everyone watching the Zoom can tell I'm an athlete. I'm going to be running the Boston Marathon this year, and I'm right there running. And if it's in the 20s, I mean, I know I'm running, but these guys are playing football. That's almost as tough. And 20 degrees in the 20s, it's not really that cold. Now, I'm not throwing a ball, but I don't. And the wind, you said 17 miles per hour. I saw gusting 25 to 30. That's not wind that's going to disrupt a game. So I think that we need to at least account for the fact that everyone's going to try to make the weather seem like this extreme. I mean, it is a dome team going to sub 30, but they drew the line at sub 30 because it's going to be in the 20s, and that's not terrible when you consider most of the fields. And I'm sure Baltimore it's heated. The field is heated. The benches are heated. It's just not single digits. There's a big difference when you get 25 degrees colder than this game is going to be, like we saw with Kansas City and Miami. It's not going to look like that in this game.
Yeah. And the other big thing, I don't know if this affects prop betting. The Ravens announced that Marlon Humphrey, who I believe is their top corner, won't be playing in the game.
And I
Oh, I
don't
didn't
think
see that.
he hasn't been in for a while. He's missed several games, so that would be good news for them if he was playing. But I think he's missed so many games this year, and they've kind of rolled on. Um, but did you guys get the sense of watching last week's games, that the teams by and large that lost tackled like they'd never played tackle football before in their lives? And I'm starting to wonder if the winner of this football tournament is going to be the toughest teams, the best tackling teams, which is going to favor the Ravens in this game and the Lions in the NFC. That a lot of it is coming down to who can actually make a decent tackle and stop first down conversions. Some of those games last week, like the Eagles, the Cowboys, the tackling was so god awful. And the Steelers as well in the Buffalo game. Um, it's shocking, and I don't think it's because these football players are so coddled and all that. It's like I'm sure they're just sick of every hit that they deliver as a penalty, and they don't come full force like they used to. They try to wrangle people down. They try to push them out of bounds. Quarterbacks look like their head gonna slide, but then they don't, and the guy doesn't want to get faked out. So I don't know that the players aren't as physical. They're just trying. They're probably subconsciously sick of the penalties potentially, or just not that tough a team, or well coached, or that all into a blender. But if that's the case, if the playoffs are going to start to come down to the more tough physical teams, that's where I would want to be on the Ravens side of this one.
Well, and that's the way they were describing their strength on both sides of the ball, that they're just more physical than other teams. And they said that after Miami, they said it after San Francisco, on their way
So
to.
I will likely, I don't have a strong feeling one way or the other, but I'm probably going to register my pick as Houston plus the 9.5, because if you think Stroud is a top 5 quarterback or whatever you think of Stroud, I would rather have CJ. If you just picked games by going with the best quarterback, especially if it's an elite quarterback, you're going to give me 9.5 points with the better quarterback, an elite quarterback, not just a better quarterback, but an elite quarterback that I think Stroud is knocking on the door of if he's not there already. I almost can't turn it down.
Yeah, when I consider that the weather is, at least if the forecast doesn't change, that doesn't seem to be weather that is really that disruptive. Stroud played outside in the Midwest in college. It's not like he's never played outdoors before. Same for all the people on his team. And I will say that the people that were picking the Ravens this week on podcasts were picking them in the first half. A large majority of them were going for them in the first half. So I think that everyone's thinking the same thing. It gives you a couple of outs if you have Houston. I feel like you have the backdoor potential where the Ravens, or Houston rather, is just, if the season is over and that becomes apparent, well, you finish the game strong. Maybe you get a touchdown at the end and it's a backdoor cover and it's still considered a successful season. Or Houston keeps it a game the entire time, in which case I think that, like Dallas last week, if things went well for them, you could have seen plenty of scenario where Dallas blows out Green Bay. If things don't go well for the Ravens, I could also see a potential for things to go south just based on how poorly it's gone for them in playoffs past.
Yeah, all really good points. I think I'm gonna actually lay the points on this one. I can't imagine a rookie quarterback. I mean, I said it last week. I didn't think a rookie quarterback and rookie head coach would beat the Browns team, but I was kind of fooled by their defense. They obviously weren't as good as I projected them out to be. But I think in this one, when you have a defense that's a little more proven and a lot more proven in Baltimore, I'm going to take my chances with them going against the rookie QB confusing him, getting pressure on him. I mean, there was a lot of situations last week where, Nico Collins was kind of like wide open making all these plays. I don't think he's going to be able to do that in Baltimore. So yeah, I think I'm going to lay the 9.5 here.
Yeah, I could definitely see the ghosts of what Stroud's done in some of his road games in the past, and the Ravens have had plenty of time now. Not only, first of all, they played him, and then second of all, they've got the film on him not being good on the road. They've been without Tank Dell for a while, but it's just another kind of level down for the pass catchers on Houston. But if he is a top 5 quarterback, I think that I heard people, I guess the last kind of point I'll make about Houston is how much did the Stroud concussion help him? Because otherwise he'd be in game 20 of his rookie season, and he did get a chance to miss a few weeks in late in the season, and his best 2 games based on QBR were the last 2 games. So he's definitely trending up for a strong finish. And if he hadn't had those, obviously nobody wants a concussion, but missing those, 3 games he missed?
2.
2 games, missing those 2 games, 3 weeks, 2 games, that's got to be a positive going into this game.
And they were money games that he ended up outshining the opponents, but they were also both in a dome.
Yep.
It's an obvious statement, and I agree with Chris. The weather can get overblown, but especially the type of offense that he runs and these high-level passers is just better in a dome than it is when it gets outside and gets a little cold. The field heaters warm things up and give a little precipitation on the grass. The ball can get slippery. It'll change. It could change the one bomb that Nico Collins makes a great catch on in a dome may slide out of his hands in Baltimore and change the entire complexity of the game. So I do think the weather is going to take them down a notch. I'm getting suckered in by my love of Stroud, and the 9.5 points is so much.
And I'm flip-flopping on myself because I said if Houston wins this game, they're going to be getting 8 to 10 points and get crushed in the next round. I said it last week. So my last week's me is on Andrew's side. This week's me is on your side, RC.
I'm always wrong about Baltimore, so please, I've just teed it up a Baltimore victory by 10 or more. So,
and I guess last thing I'll say, because I know Andrew's working hard to get to the next game, which is his job, and it's our job to go with him, not fight him. But this is something I heard weeks ago in the barbershop, which you get to hear all kinds of great nuggets of wisdom in there. And I don't know if I didn't do any work to confirm this. Why would I? But the Super Bowl logo came out, and it was purple and red. It was the Ravens shade of purple and the 49ers shade of red. And what they were saying was that, and maybe this made its way on Twitter or somewhere on the media, because where the barbershop guys get it, but it was the last 2 years, the Super Bowl logo matched the colors of the teams that were in the game. And so that was something that I probably should have left the barbershop and put a futures bet on the exacta of the Ravens versus the 49ers, and I didn't. But it's something to think about in this game, that if whatever that is a thing, then that's obviously a notch on Baltimore's side.
Do they just pick the color schemes of the number 1 seeds on each side, and then do the number 1 seeds, have they been the ones to make it the last 2 years?
I think
the color's preseason, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, really? Because I heard it six weeks ago. I'm not even sure if these were I'm not even sure if these were the 2 number 1 seeds RC at the time. I think the Eagles were still in first when that was said.
Okay.
It was a while ago. I might have so Andrew, you seem to be nodding. You're aware of this.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. It's all over Twitter.
Okay.
But, what about props, guys? How do you guys feel? Like, are there any specific players you're looking at? Because I think there's one player that's kind of interesting. I don't know if he's going to get much playing time, but Ravens signed Dalvin Cook off once he was released by the Jets. Do you guys think that Cook could have a big role in this game?
if he does, then it helps our Houston bet.
Let's just stop talking about this game on that note. I've been waiting for the Justice Hill prop to come up for rushing, and I see it's finally up. Gus Edwards is at 50 yards, Justice Hill rushing at 19.5. Because of the weather, because of the way, if the Ravens get the lead and try to run this out as Harbaugh is wont to do, Justice Hill could get a decent amount of touches in this, right along with Gus Edwards. I don't think Dalvin Cook will. So my only prop of interest has been just a little throwaway on Justice Hill to beat 19.5 yards. But it's not. I got stronger props in the other games, but I didn't really love anything in this one.
Chris, you feel the same way?
Yeah, nothing from a prop standpoint jumped out at me in this game. I was really looking at each of the games from the point spread perspective, and I didn't really see anything that caught my eye in this one for props.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, let's move to the next one. So the Saturday night game is going to feature Green Bay going into San Francisco. The Packers coming off a huge upset win over the Cowboys. So they're going to be going into Santa Clara. They are 9.5-point underdogs in this. Over under is 50.5. Guys, is Green Bay going to actually continue this run, or is this where their story ends?
RC, you have any thoughts on that? I think I already hinted at it before. My thoughts.
I have the thought here that Green Bay is partially a fraud, a big win over a big name team. People are kind of be on them, and I think San Francisco's the best team left in the playoffs for sure. And this is just setting up to something that maybe if this was a first round game, if there was no bye and this just happened to be a first round game, and we didn't see Green Bay play Dallas, this was just the first game out of the chute, this point spread might be 12 or 13. But it is under 10, and I think I'm going to go with the complete opposite vibe of everybody getting excited about Jordan Love and the Packers, who somewhat backed their way into these playoffs, caught a Dallas team that just didn't show up. I don't think Green Bay was that much better than Dallas. It was just one of those games. So I think that Green Bay game is so in people's minds that it's holding the line down a little bit, and I'm going to go with San Francisco to blow their doors off.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I see that there's a little bit of juice on the 49ers minus 9.5. I expect that this will be 10 on Saturday, and I heard a lot of people talking about the over in this game, just because the foregone conclusion is San Francisco is going to get their points. And then you look at Green Bay, and since week 9, they've been the second best offense based on EPA per play in the league. And Love has been awesome. So you have, and so if it's a close game, they like the over. If it's a blowout, they like the over. But I don't necessarily know about that, because I could see San Francisco playing a great game on defense too. So I really feel like you were saying, RC, you have Green Bay who took down Dallas, and it's easy to say afterwards, but like we said, if Houston beats Baltimore, I don't think you need I think Baltimore is the very likely winner, but if Houston wins, you can see the path. Baltimore is a team that has had playoff struggles in the past, and so is Dallas. So I'm not saying I saw it coming, Green Bay beating Dallas, and you give them credit, but they're stepping up huge here. And the specific matchup that I never like is a team that can't defend the run, which the Packers can't, going on the road against the best running team in the league. That's going to be you're going to have a lot of big plays out of Jordan Love. And the way that he's described is, and he's getting better and better and better as the season goes on, but a lot of big plays and not so much of a success rate. meaning the big plays are carrying them, but it's not consistency. I like that they have Aaron Jones back, but I think San Fran's a different animal. I think I said it last week for sure. They were my preseason NFC pick. They were my NFC pick even when Philly was 10-1. I liked this team to they got their revenge against Philadelphia the way last season ended, where they didn't get a chance to compete for a chance in the Super Bowl because Purdy got hurt. I don't see there's going to be any letdown. You have the most hungry team with the most talent and an opponent with a specific Achilles heel run defense it's the worst thing you can have as a weakness going into play San Francisco. So the other game, I'd be more comfortable taking the points with Houston, way more comfortable with 9.5 with Houston than I would be hoping that Green Bay keeps up.
One thing I want to make clear, when I took Baltimore to lay the points 9.5, that was more of a pick. I'm also taking San Francisco to lay the 9.5 here too, but this one's my best bet of the week. And couple of stats that I want to throw out. 95 snaps. That's how many snaps Green Bay's defense was on the field last week against the Cowboys. Dak Prescott attempted 60 passes against that defense. They were in a crazy comeback mode. So now you have that tired defense traveling into San Francisco. We've seen this script before. This is when Philadelphia went into a crazy overtime game with Buffalo, right? They played over 90 snaps, and then they had to play the 49ers the week after and got crushed. I think this is something similar. I think the books also hung a really bad line on this one. I do something similar to Chris every week before the lines come out. I try to make my own lines and say, okay, like, where do I think this is going to land? And this one was by far my biggest discrepancy. I had this at 13.5 when it came out. So that's a 4-point difference. That's how I knew I really liked this game. I think that the Packers, a lot of people are just reading too much into it was more of a Dallas collapse than Jordan Love coming and bursting onto the scene for me. And one other thing to keep in mind, Dan Quinn, he's 0-6 as the Dallas Cowboys DC going up against his former offensive assistants. That's Kyle Shanahan, Mike McDaniels, and Matt LaFleur. They clearly know how to break his defense, and that's why you saw the Packers have these wide receivers just bust coverage. I mean, there was one play where Luke Musgrave was wide open. I think Romeo Doubs broke free multiple times in that game. That stuff ain't happening against the Niners, who are really well coached, well disciplined, and you know that Kyle Shanahan isn't going to let those certain offensive plays attack his defense. So for me, I think this one's the easiest call. I think I'm with RC in that Green Bay is going to get their butts kicked in this.
Can I add in one of the reasons why I have San Francisco as my best bet too? When I look back at the way that Green Bay ended the season going into the Dallas game, here was the 5 games, their last 5 games that got them into the playoffs. Starting week 14, they got beat by Tommy DeVito in an upset. They followed that, and that was on a Monday night game. The following week, big game with Tampa Bay, that the two teams were thought this was going to be probably a tiebreaker situation for a wild card, and Tampa Bay throttled them. So they get back-to-back losses. They fall to 6-8. They really got to win out to get to the playoffs.
If I can interrupt you for a second, that Tampa Bay game was at home. I don't know. Did you mention that?
No, that's a good point. That was at home, coming off a loss that was needed to be a major win for them at home, with a Florida team coming to the north in December, and they got their butts handed to them. Then they go at Carolina, and you're like, okay, well that's fortunate. They're going to get this easy win against the Panthers, and I remember it vividly because I loaded up the truck on the Green Bay defense for fantasy football playoffs, and Bryce Young, who can't complete a forward pass, had his best game of the season against Green Bay. They had the Packers on the ropes. They almost came back and won that game. I think Green Bay, I think, won it late with the field. I think it ended up getting tied, or it was very close at the end. So
33 to 30.
they could barely beat Carolina. They made Bryce Young look great the following week, so now they've still got life. They're 7-8. They got to keep winning. They draw Minnesota at Minnesota, and Minnesota needs that game to keep their playoff hopes alive. Then Green Bay whacks them, but I also remember, and Chris, you could back this up, half the Minnesota defense was out when Byron Murphy and everybody else was out for that game. The Minnesota was going into a free fall, and that was that the Jared Hall start as well, week 17.
Hall played the first half of that game.
Yeah, so they got the worst Minnesota team imaginable, and they beat them. So credit to them. They get to 8-8. They still got to win one more to hopefully sneak into the playoffs. They play Chicago, and they don't play a very good game, but they do win and beat Chicago 17-9. In their last 5 games, they haven't really played a great game. I mean, you can consider them beating Minnesota by 23 a great game, but it was a pretty weak opponent with their worst starting quarterback of the season. So that team goes in and just happens to catch Dallas, to me, at the right time. If I throw that Dallas game out of my memory banks, which I already have, Green Bay, to me, is that team of the last 5 weeks of the season that doesn't even really deserve to be in the playoffs. So San Francisco, to me, is the clear favorite, and I think to you guys as well. So I don't see how Green Bay, especially coming off that big win with Dallas, there's going to be a reversal of fortune, and the play counts, like Andrew was talking about, like everything is going to point to San Francisco just handing out a beating here. And Green Bay being fine with it. Green Bay go, hey, we made it further than we ever thought we would. So this was a good season.
I was walking the dog yesterday, and I was thinking about what I was talking about earlier with those quarterbacks, and I was thinking, I think Houston and Green Bay are going to be interesting off-season conversations, assuming they both, well, I guess I shouldn't even say assuming they both go out this round. Even if they advance one more round, they are the 2 teams that I have circled as fade teams, like Jacksonville this year, who earned what they got last year. But anytime you see a team like Jacksonville last year where they could have not even been in the playoffs, and then they make that big comeback against the Chargers, and then they bowed out of the playoffs, but played a competitive game against the Chiefs and covered the spread. It's just like, okay, all that stuff happened, but it could have not happened. And if it didn't happen, what would be the difference in perception with the team? So that's where I'm looking at Houston and but more particularly Green Bay, because the talk is that not only is Love great, but the team is so young, the youngest average age of any team that's ever won a playoff game. So I think when you have a team like that that's so young, you just say, oh, sky's the limit. We're just going to grow and grow. And it's all uphill from not uphill, downhill from here, but all this slope is going up in terms of expectations for the Packers. And I was thinking that it's going to be very good to bet against this team next year. But why wait till next year? Bet against them right now. And my numbers that I look at for regression are strong on the Packers. So that's why I like when my numbers line up with my opinion, and they do in this game. So that's why San Francisco was my best bet as well to lay the 9.5. And I even think it's interesting to take them in the first half, because unlike the Ravens, who are almost double-digit favorites, I'm just looking at these 2 games. They're happening on the same day. The spread's decently the same at the moment. I was asked earlier in the week, what do I think about the Packers' chances? And I said I'd much rather be taking my chance with a 9.5-point underdog in Houston than I would with Green Bay. I think that even if they go out there and play a great game, Niners lead the league in rushes at 10+ yards, and Green Bay does not have a strong defense. Remember last week, even coming out of the game, the thought was Joe Barry saved his job.
Yep.
This is a team that's ready to
Mhm.
get rid of their defensive coordinator because they have so much talent on defense, but they've been underachieving by so much. So that 1 week really did change people's perception in an irrational way. So maybe if this game happened last week, I mean, at Dallas, you're getting 7, and at San Francisco, you're getting 9.5. I think maybe the numbers should be closer to Andrew's.
For the listeners out there that don't go on RC's site, every week this season, we published our picks against the spread. And when all three of us agree, we're at over a 60% clip hitting that. Last time was the first time that all three of us had our best bet being the same game. That was the Rams, and they covered. And now you're getting it here again. All three of us are calling the 49ers our best bet of the week. So I think this is if you're going to take something out of this podcast, I think this is the game.
It's guaranteed.
I was just about to say it, but couldn't have said it better.
What about props, guys? Let's dive into that. What are we feeling here? It seems like, we're all on the Niners, but there are going to be 17-mile-per-hour winds. I know you guys don't like it when I talk about that, but I am a California boy, so when I hear 17-mile-per-hour winds, I get scared. I get scared when I hear rain, bad weather. Do you guys think that we know that 49ers are going to win by a lot, but are we nervous about going too crazy with receiving props and maybe you want to gear it more towards CMC's rushing props?
Well, I'm not even commenting as a future finisher of a marathon. I'm just saying that even people handicapping football say 20 miles per hour is really the wind threshold that you need to look at, sustained, in the gusts. And I'm not saying the weather doesn't matter, Andrew. I'm just saying that I was just observing that, I'm in New England. I'm 20 miles south of Boston, and if I could tell you, it's nonstop on the news. If there's a storm coming, that's gonna, you know, throw 4 inches of snow on us. That it's 3 days worth of prep on the news, and so it's not always as extreme as it seems. I was interested to see the Kansas City Miami game because that actually was extreme weather. Of course, I couldn't see it because I'm not paying for Peacock. So I just had to have the live look-in that happened on ESP or NBC. But that's extreme. That's going to impact the game. I don't think this wind should impact the passing game too much. I think both quarterbacks can throw in 17-mile-per-hour winds, and you never even know what direction it's going to be. If you're throwing into the wind or against the wind, I think that's less of an issue than if it's a crosswind.
And one more thing to throw up, Chris, to support your point. There was a game like this earlier in the year where we saw the San Francisco team humiliate somebody else in bad weather. And that actually is that Eagles game that I was talking about earlier. That I think had close to I think 13, 14 mile per hour wind. So if that gives you any comfort in playing Brock Purdy in a DFS lineup or betting on his props, that, you can refer to that game because that didn't have the best weather either.
I'm afraid of cold and rain, not moderate and rain. And this is going to be for Green Bay. This is going to be like a trip to Florida because it's going to be 55 degrees. So a little rain will help the ball be a little stickier if it's not a torrential downpour. But I don't really love any of the props in this game. I'm afraid to play any of the San Francisco props because I don't know if they're going to try to attack them all on the ground, or if maybe Green Bay gets a little lucky and San Francisco has to throw. Teams tend to overstack the San Francisco run, so Shanahan counters with the passing game. That's why Purdy has had these huge games. I never know what way San Francisco is going to go at it, but if they get a lead, the passing numbers are going to go down, and they're going to run that game out of the building. But on the flip side, I'm more interested in the Green Bay passing props because Jordan Love's going to have to either throw his way to victory, throw his way to staying in the game, or it's going to be like Dak Prescott. They're going to be down 27-0 before the half, and they're going to be throwing every single play. And Jordan Love is going to beat these prop passing yardages, and some of the receivers are going to go with them. I'm tempted to go back and get the money that Jaden Reed stole from me last week. One of the only props I got my butt handed to me on, and I was betting it in game. I think it was like I'm just off the top of my head. It was like a 45-yard over. So I bet that before the game started. Then it went down to 41 after the first drive or so. So I'm like, okay, I'll throw a couple more bucks on it. Then it went down to 32, and I'm like, all right, I'll throw a couple more bucks on that. Then it went down to 25 at like halftime. Like, he's the number one receiver on this team. He always gets 40 plus yards, especially in recent games. Like, of course he's going to get that. And I threw a couple more bucks on it. Then it went down to 17, and I threw a couple more bucks. So then it went down to 12, and I'm like, I mean, all he's got to do is catch one pass. So he ended up with 0. So I want my Jaden Reed money back. So I may get suckered into trying to prove a point. But other than that, I think I'm going to do maybe a little bit of Jordan Love passing yardage over.
Yeah, especially if you expect Green Bay to be trailing in this game. Jordan Love passing props are probably the way to go. Or maybe you can even go attempts, because I don't think that Aaron Jones is going to get going on the ground. He's definitely not scoring 3 touchdowns on the San Francisco defense. I'll say that much. So I kind of like Love's passing attempts here. I think he's probably going to get into that 40-50 range just due to game script.
Yeah, he's going to need to get up there because they're on it as far as and I'm just looking at FanDuel. I didn't shop it around, but Love's attempts are 35.5 on FanDuel, and that's actually being juiced to the under -122.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean,
that's a high number.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen it go up, like, I've seen it be like 38.5, 39, but 35 is definitely on the higher side for sure. But
yeah, I mean, in a lot of, I could see a scenario here where if the 49ers dominate with this game in the way that I think that they could, it would be them possessing the ball. And if they were up big, being able to run the ball and keep it away from Green Bay and take the rest of the clock out for themselves. So that would be my concern with the attempts going over, because if things aren't going well in the beginning, I think they're going to try to run the ball with Aaron Jones at least a little bit, because they do seem to have a decent ability to run the ball. And I think they know their defense isn't good. So you think you'd want to possess the ball a little bit. So one thing that I'm curious to hear you guys' thoughts on, because was talked about this week, is that Green Bay in their last 2 big games won the coin toss and took the ball. They did it in the Dallas game, and they did it in one other game that I don't recall. Obviously, we were just going through the games, but twice they took the ball. So it was actually RJ Bell's Dream Preview. They were talking about it, that they were trying to put some bets in that took advantage of, because if San Francisco wins the toss, most likely they're going to defer. So they were giving a better than normal 50-50 chance that that Green Bay starts with the ball. So they were looking at first quarter bets, Green Bay to score first. Those kind of bets with that in mind. I wasn't really in love with the idea, because I don't like Green Bay in this game. I think if they take the ball first, they're going to punt it.
It'd be 3-0.
Yeah.
There was a team notorious for doing that, for listeners. I think it was Bruce Arians and Jameis Winston that year when Winston was the quarterback. They would always get the ball first and try to score, and a lot of people would go in on those first quarter, first half bets, but Winston would just end up tossing a pick anyways. So like in a game like this, even if Packers do possess the ball to start, like I'm just nervous about that, how hyped that San Francisco defense is going to be, the crowd noise, whatever. Like it's I don't know that I'd go for it, but I see the logic in it though. I mean, you start with the ball, you have the extra possession. Like just from a statistical perspective, it makes sense.
It's an interesting note if you're looking to play the first half, knowing that you're going to be short one possession versus San Francisco for the game, or San Fran for the second half, where they're going to get the just assuming that there's a higher probability that San Francisco starts the second half with the ball because Green Bay wants it first. I like that from the 49ers standpoint.
Yeah, agree. Anything else, gentlemen, or should we move to the next one? Okay.
Good.
All right. Next game. We have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who pulled off an upset of their own against the Eagles. But I mean, on this podcast, at least RC and Chris saw the Buccaneers coming. I was on the Eagles side with that one. We have the Bucks going into the Lions, who defended their home against their former quarterback, which was definitely one to watch. Had a bunch of storylines. We won't dive too much into that. But the line here is Detroit is home 6.5 home favorites, and the over under is 48.5. I think this is the biggest playoff line for Detroit in franchise history. And I think they've only been favored by more than 6 points twice in the past 20 years, which is just insane to see how far this team has come, getting their first playoff win in over 30 years. There's new times in Detroit. And one thing that just like really stuck with me at the end of that game was when Dan Campbell, the coach of the Lions, gave Jared Goff the game ball and basically said, Jared, you're good enough for Detroit. That just like kind of sent goosebumps down my spine. It was like really cool moment to see like Goff overcome that team that basically said he wasn't good enough and send them home in the playoffs. So what are you guys feeling about this game?
Now I want to see Detroit lose just for the torture of it all. But I think I'm picking Detroit and laying the 6.5 because I do not trust the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to play 2 good games in a row and win against better NFL teams. My one hesitation is the weakest pass defense left in this playoffs is the Lions. And Tampa Bay does not care who they're facing. They're gunning it downfield. And I'm a little wobbly as to whether I should take the 6.5 for backdoor cover purposes and just a possible outright Tampa Bay win. I don't think the Lions are unbeatable. But outside of the pass defense, the Lions are better in every way than Tampa Bay is. But that pass defense is so bad, and Tampa Bay is going to try to go after it. It just takes, if Mike Evans decides he wants to catch footballs again for a living, Tampa Bay could get up 7, 10, 14, nothing in a blink and change the dynamic of this game. That Tampa Bay defense, we've been talking about it for 2 months now. It just is getting a little bit better every week. This is one of the most talented defenses left in these playoffs. If they take another step forward, and if Baker hits a couple of, lucky shots on the Detroit secondary, it could really flip this game. So I'm interested to see where you guys are at on it, if you have any strong feelings on it.
I liked last game where, like I said, where my numbers lined up with my opinion. And in this game, my numbers are against my opinion because it I looked at my numbers show or come for Detroit, but and I can see certainly a path for that. That win last week was huge for the franchise, huge for Goff versus his old team, and I always feel like even though it's the playoffs, it's kind of hard to put the genie back in the bottle once you have that unbelievably big win. So my instinct was I like Tampa Bay in the first half because of that. I don't see, I think if there's going to be any hangover from that incredible win, that I would want to play it early, not late. And if you look at what Tampa Bay has done recently, they had some pretty bad games, particularly, the Philadelphia game masks the 9-0 game against Carolina, losing to New Orleans. haven't been. I mean, you talk about the defense, RC, but I kind of feel like I want to be on the side of Tampa Bay. I don't want to be against my numbers, and they just fit the profile of a team that wins their home wild card game and bows out the next round. But I'm on team fade the Lions. It just, it worked last week from a point spread perspective, but they went on. I will say I would love this spot the way it would set up for the Rams NFC futures if they got through.
Don't
and
even remind me.
unfortunately they're gone, and it's too bad.
Can I ask a question of both of you guys, since you both are dealers in such things? What did you think the line was going to be? I thought this line would be smaller. The bigger line is attracting me to Tampa Bay just for the line's sake. But did you guys see this line coming out this way, or did you think it was going to be smaller? Am I crazy thinking it was maybe going to be -4, 4.5?
That's exactly what I had. Go ahead, Andrew.
No, I was just going to say I had it perfectly at 6.5. This is where I thought the number should be. And the reason why, that win against the Eagles, I think the public and Vegas is kind of overreacting to it. I think what the Lions did against the Rams is 10 times more impressive than what Tampa Bay did against the Eagles, because that Eagles team, honestly, put any NFC South team in there, maybe not the Panthers, but the Falcons, the Saints, I think anybody would have beaten the Eagles that day. So I don't want to read too much into them winning by 23. What I have stuck in the back of my mind is the way the Tampa Bay Buccaneers closed the season out. They lost 23-13 at home to the Saints, right? They should have lost to Carolina when they only won 9-0, right? Like, there were 2 touchdowns taken off the board for the Panthers, which were kind of like BS penalties. But where I'm trying to go with this is Tampa Bay has a glaring weakness, and that's their offensive line. And I think Detroit's D-line could really take advantage of that. Baker's been having issues with his ribs. Like, I saw him favoring him during the game in Philly. He's had ankle problems. We know that. And we know this Detroit defense is really freaking physical. I'm scared the guy's not going to be able to last the entire game. But like you guys are saying, Detroit has a really bad secondary, and Tampa Bay loves
really bad.
You let Nick Mullins throw 400 yards on you. Like, Baker Mayfield can burn you. It's just, my question is, will the Detroit defense that we saw against the Rams show up against Tampa Bay? If they do, I think I'm on Detroit's side here.
Stafford threw for 367 in that game, and there wasn't too much pushback. I mean, Detroit played one of their better pass defense games, but it was still pretty bad.
But you saw the shots that Stafford took in that game. I mean, there were a bunch of there was one point where the guy looked like he was concussed when his eyes rolled back and he was laying out on the field. I think there was even a point where Puka Nacua came out of the game. Kyron Williams broke his hand in the game. All this to say, these guys are really freaking physical, and I don't know if Tampa's ready for something like that. I think this is probably going to be one of the more physical teams they're going to play all year.
I was interested to hear, even going back to last week, Mike Lombardi was saying in handicapping the Tampa Bay Philly game that he thought that Baker's ribs might be an issue, but additionally, Baker getting passes bad at the line of scrimmage. So when I hear Andrew highlighting the differences in the trenches, with Detroit having a really good front seven, good against the run, good with the pass rush, and a questionable offensive line for the Bucs, that's where I see it manifesting itself in sacks, obviously, but also if they're tipping balls down, I could see a frustrating day for Tampa Bay. And yeah, Detroit's got a bad pass defense, but if they're allowed to pull Puka Nacua's shirt at the end of the game like that and throw people around, then I think and I could see that being the case. I think if you're going to you got the home team, a big story in Detroit. It's not a big story that Tampa Bay is on to the next round. So not that anything nefarious would be going on, but just subconsciously, if you get a call here and there, let them play, let Detroit get away with some stuff because they're the home team. and be physical in the secondary, then that lousy secondary can hold up.
I mean, they definitely got calls, but I think there was one thing that happened in that game, and I want Stafford to stay in the game, but the guy was clearly concussed, and they let him back in when he got knocked out. So I mean, I think the NFL did the Rams a favor too with that one, just letting Stafford stay in the game. But there should have clearly been a penalty called on that. I think he got leveled by 2 Detroit defenders on that hit. So what about props wise? So if we think that Detroit has a bad secondary, actually we know Detroit has a bad secondary, and Evans has been kind of silent the past 2 games, could this be a situation where Evans comes back to life and has a nice bounce back game?
He could, he should. So it's not a bad way to play the prop, but I've taken early in the week all the Baker over passing yard props I could get my hands on, because whether it's going to be Evans or Godwin or whoever, Baker's going to beat that number. You can't run on the line. The worst combination, the worst matchup in the playoffs remaining is the Tampa Bay run game, which is horrific, versus the Detroit run defense, which is really good. Tampa Bay will not be able to run the ball. Subsequently, the most wide matchup remaining in the playoffs could be the Tampa Bay passing game against Detroit's pass defense. So this is where I think the pass attempts and everything else, because even if the Buccaneers get up by 7 or 10, go 10 nothing, they are not going to sit on the ball and try to run this game out. Baker won't let it happen. He'll just keep throwing bombs to everybody, even if it's not in his best interest. So whether Tampa Bay pulls into the lead and controls this game, it's going to be through the air. It's not going to be through the ground. And then if Tampa Bay gets walloped right off the bat in this game, then Baker's going to be throwing every single play. He almost is throwing every single play anyway.
Yeah, that's a good point. And to RC's other point about Detroit, you can't run on them. I mean, Kyron Williams was on a tear and he couldn't even get through to them. I think he only had like 60 yards rushing. We love Rachaad White, but behind that offensive line, they couldn't get going with weaker run defenses. I think Detroit might be top 5, if not the best in the league. So I'd be really careful playing Rachaad White in props or DFS lineups.
Baker, his last 5 games, including the playoff game, 4 of his last 5, 280 and above passing. 3 of those 5, 300 plus and above, with a 330-81. His one game where he wasn't over 280, and I think his prop number is like 240 or 250 in this game, was the Carolina game, Week 18. Mayfield only threw for 137 yards, but that's when he got his rib injury and his ankle injury, and they were just trying to escape that game with Baker still in one piece. They needed to win it to win the division. So that's the first time I've ever seen Tampa Bay play conservative. They were just trying to get Baker through that game. Everything else surrounding it, Baker's been just on a tear. So now he's getting one of the best matchup he's had since last week. The other worst pass defense in the world was Philadelphia. Now he's going to get it with Detroit. Only him getting knocked out, like Andrew said, by a Detroit pass rush, getting knocked out of the game, is the only thing that will stand between him and getting that prop.
Well, so let me. I want to play devil's advocate on the prop because I was on the Stafford alt overs last week, and that was one of the things that we had good success with and hit pretty well. Baker, here's my issue with it. I saw that you posted it early in the week, RC, and I was in agreement. And then something happened that always makes me skid on the back of my heels like Fred Flintstone to a screeching halt. I heard it several more times on podcasts, on Bet On It, Andy Lang, Baker Mayfield. I said play it up to 260. And for the same reasons, the Detroit's pass defense is bad. They were just good in the red zone. That's why they were able to win the game last week, and listed all the big totals that they've given up in the last several weeks. Baker in the playoffs, he's a player. I mean, 7 touchdowns, 1 interception. So it's not like a quarterback that we can expect him to be successful. He doesn't shrink in these big moments. He's actually been playing well. There was a guy in the Sharp 600 that gave the same. Baker was over 4 of the last 5. So I mean, everybody was on the Rams last week, and that got there. And this could be a similar type of thing. And the yardage is moving up. But help me understand, because I don't remember watching much of this game, the Week 6 game, where these two teams played at Tampa Bay. Detroit won 20-6. Goff threw for 383, and Baker threw for 206. So I'm sure there's an explanation. I just don't know it, but it's in my notes here to because I knew you had this posted on the site, so I wanted to get your thoughts.
I'd say the first half of the season, especially early on, was the worst version of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers that there was. Godwin was not playing well. I think he was hurt in and out of the lineup, in and out of games. They hadn't really found a number 3 wide receiver. They hadn't really just starting to discover that they could throw the ball to Rachaad White for big things. I just like last week with Tampa Bay, just thinking about the Tampa Bay team. This is just a totally different. This like Houston, losing to Baltimore week 1. This is just a totally different Houston team now. I think the same holds true for Tampa. As they've gone on, the passing game Baker just keeps getting better and better, more and more comfortable, and the offensive line protection for him on pass blocking has gotten better as the season's gone along. Their run blocking is terrible, but their pass blocking has gotten plausible. So I just throw the whole Week 6 game in the trash.
Yeah, okay, and that's acceptable. I was thinking that, and I do remember this about the game though. Leading in, that was the spot where people were actually playing against Detroit. That was the spot where they thought Detroit was going to fall down at Tampa, and they played a really solid game. It was 20-6, but it didn't seem like it was a blowout. It was a game, and it turned into a 14-point game, but it wasn't like they went there and destroyed Tampa Bay, but it was more the surprise of them not failing, which is what everybody was expecting of Detroit at that time. And then you recall, maybe you don't, Week 7, Detroit went to Baltimore, and that's when they got smacked. And I'm looking at Tampa's schedule right here, and it looks like it was like the middle of a couple of game funk there. They lost to Detroit at home. The next week they lost to Atlanta, lost a close one at Buffalo, and then lost a shootout against Houston. So it was kind of a rough patch there, a 4-game losing streak for the Buccaneers. So you're right. Then they turned it around, and you see much better results as they came down the stretch.
Yeah, and the reverse for Detroit, their pass defense has just gotten worse as the season's gone on. Whether somebody's figured out something with more and more tape, whatever it was, Detroit's pass defense keeps getting worse. Tampa Bay's passing offense and blocking just keeps getting better. So whether that's Tampa Bay in control and throwing their way to victory, or whether that's Tampa Bay way down and trying to throw themselves back into the game, in a game in a dome, so we're not going to have any weather adjustments. It's my favorite prop, just like Stafford was last week. Although I was way more confident in the Stafford prop, but I'm pretty confident with the Baker prop here, and I'm taking Trey Palmer. I could do Mike Evans, but it's a pretty high prop, and Evans has been pretty shaky the last half of the season. He's starting to get back to where he's dropping wide open bombs. but Trey Palmer, his last 3 weeks has been over 40 yards every game, and his prop is like 20, over under 20 in this game. He hasn't been getting many catches, but he's a big play guy. He's get the yards. You could get the Trey Palmer prop in by the end of the first quarter.
And that's another one I found interesting, RC, because there's a couple of things I wanted to say, because I think that I definitely hear you on the passing prop. I like the idea of going with the third receiver who just needs a reception or two. But I did find it interesting that when I was looking at the receiving yards, all of the Buccaneers were being juiced to the over for receiving yards, including Rachaad White. The one that was being bet under, this is offshore now, minus 130 to the under, was Trey Palmer, and I just was very interested in that. Evans is minus 130 to the over. Godwin's even at 65.5, minus 114 either way. And I just thought that was, well, K. Dotton, I guess, is even too. But the market was going against Trey Palmer, and I actually like the idea. I'm looking at 17.5. That's what I see. And I just was curious about that. But I think that I like.
I saw it was 20 when I bet it, but it was like either plus 100 or minus 110. 17.5 I see is minus 120, which is still pretty decent because I think that one's going to be a layup. The Evans line is 71.5. He has not hit that number but one time in his last 3, 4, 6 games. Twice in his last 9 games. That's why I'm staying away from the Evans one.
I like Auten here too. You saw Baker use him a lot more, 11 targets last week. I think like against the really good D line and getting pressure quickly in Baker's face, I think Auten could be a good check down guy.
Yeah, see the Auten line is starting to be juiced to the under too, so I'm gonna do some Auten. I'm gonna make myself a note to do that after the show.
I think my favorite prop from this game. This is kind of like don't overthink it, but we're talking about the passing yards for Baker, and I believe there's going to be some yards there to be had, but I don't even see a scenario, even if Tampa Bay goes in there and gets the upset. I don't see a scenario where Rachaad White gets over the 53.5 rushing yards. I mean, last week he had a decent game. He had 71 yards rushing, and that was a pretty good game. What I'm wanted to ask you guys is, it seems like 2 games in a row now where Rachaad White wasn't really getting the receiving yards that I would have expected from him. Is there what's the issue going on there?
It's not just the last 2 games, it's every game. They don't throw the ball to him on purpose. So like if you're gonna bet McCaffrey, you're gonna get targets. There are guys that you can count on to get targets out of the backfield, that like an Aaron Jones, like it's just part of the offense. Rachaad White, he's lucky if he gets 1 pass that's to him on purpose. And Baker they could be up 10-0 and just kind of need to just play smart and safe in a game, and he'll have Rachaad White flare out wide open. He'll do a fake block and just kind of leak out of the backfield, be right there, and Baker will scramble around traffic and then gun it downfield without even looking to see where Rachaad White was. If I knew that Baker was going to, if you gave me a number from the future and said, hey, Rachaad White had 10 targets in the Detroit game, that's the only thing I'm going to tell you. I tell you that the Buccaneers are going to win this game. They could win this game if they would incorporate Rachaad White in the passing game on purpose, because I don't think Detroit will be planning for it because it hasn't happened. But as a prop bettor, I can't confidently take Rachaad White because I never see them make an effort to get him the ball on purpose. And then when he gets it the 1 or 2 times, he usually breaks 9 tackles and goes for 25 plus yards. So I do have confidence that he can get the over as he usually does, but I don't like it when it's just going to be one or two passes potentially that he's going to have to make his hay maybe off of just one whole catch.
Yeah, and that's what I was looking at. It's like I like the rushing yards 54.5 because in case they want to, in case they get themselves into a game plan where they do dump the ball to him, as you said. But if they're not going to do it, and you're seeing on film they refuse to do it, his rushing and receiving yards are 80.5. And I think then, you know, you're in trouble. Well, if they go dump off heavy to Rachaad White, you still have a chance because I don't see him getting a lot of rushing yards. I think he could rush for 30 yards in this game with how good Detroit is against the run. Now, it could be Detroit stopping the run, or it could be Tampa going in and not even having the game plan to try to run. Like you said, that's kind of the way they play. I like Rachaad White under better than even the receiving overs, just because of the volatility and where the ball goes.
I can't bring myself to bet an under on Rachaad White, so I have to recuse myself from the whole thing.
It's
Your
true,
logic sounds, Chris.
sometimes the hardest bets are the ones that are the ones that win. You know, you just gotta set the money free, and if it loves you, it'll come back to you. But I understand your love for Rachaad White.
I'll go lose my money with Kate Otten and all them. I'm not going to lose my money watching Rachaad White beat me.
watching him just be completely dynamic and
Yeah, I should just bet. I should have bet the under on him every week to ensure he'd be the league MVP.
yeah. So all right, I'm gonna throw one more thing out there with Tampa Bay because we seem to. I mean, I know there's legitimate arguments on both sides. I think with my numbers coming to Detroit, that makes it tough. But in the last two seasons, Tampa Bay, when avenging a loss, is 6-0 against the spread. So they lost that game earlier in the year, as we already talked about. And as a road underdog under Todd Bowles, I would not have guessed this. 8-1 against the spread in their last 9.
Wow.
They've been very good as a road underdog. So they're kind of in
So
a
how's
roll with
Campbell as a home favorite?
That I don't have here.
That probably doesn't happen often. I can pull that up.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's a thing or it's a mixed bag.
Yeah. Did you guys see the Bowles press conference when the reporter was asking him how he's going to handle the frigid weather in Detroit because it's only 15 degrees there? Did you see it?
I saw a
beautiful.
Headline and I meant to watch his reaction, but I didn't get around to it.
I'll put it. I'll put a link to it in the chat. It was pretty funny, but it was actually funnier to read the description of his reaction than it was to actually watch it. But he was like, "Nah, I'm pretty sure they got a dome up there. We're going to be good." He goes, he said, "We're only going to be outside for about 20 seconds, walking from the bus to the inside." He went into detail. It's funny. It was just beautiful.
I'm envisioning that question being asked with such confidence that it probably threw him for a second. Like, wait, what is this? They have a dome still, right?
It was asked with a lot of confidence. a lot of medium size and big size words, and he just was like, "Listen, it's all good."
Yeah, I'll get back to the audience on that question. My database is acting up right now, so let's move to the next game. And for me, this one I feel like is the one I'm looking most forward to. We have the Kansas City Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes going into Orchard Park to take on the Buffalo Bills and Josh Allen, which you're getting a heavyweight QB matchup here and a rematch of that playoff game 2 years ago where it was just a shootout. They changed the overtime rules because of it. I think Gabe Davis had 4 touchdowns. The Bills are 2.5-point home favorites here, and the over-under is 46.5. Mahomes has all the stats when he's an underdog that, like, he's the surefire bet. I think he's 8-1-1 against the spread when he's an underdog. So a lot of people are betting on him. Do you guys think that KC has a chance against Buffalo here, or are you guys thinking that this might be the Bills' year?
Okay,
I think it could be either of those things. Get RC.
I want to ask a question that in Andrew's intro to this, just out of curiosity. Well, yeah, I want to ask it now. Andrew said, did you say you were most looking forward to this game?
Yes.
If all these games were on Peacock and we were all like Chris and too cheap to get Peacock to watch them, but you were allowed one free pass to watch any one of these games and you weren't going to be able to watch the other three, what's the game that you would most want to watch?
This one.
Chris?
That's my opinion. I want to see the Allen versus
I'm just
Mahomes
curious.
match. Yeah.
If this was on Peacock, I might even pay for it.
There you go. RC, check that out. Chris is
I'm not too cheap. I am principled. If we all pay for it, the NFL is just going to put another game on. So I'm just trying to save. I'm trying to fight for the freedom of watching football.
All right, Chris, let me change your mind potentially. Let me rock your world. You know what helps us as bettors? If the majority of fans don't pay and don't watch these games and they lose all content, they don't get a feel for these things, they're going to have to rely on the media reports to tell them what happened in these games. They're not watching it for themselves. Is that to our advantage if less people are watching it for fantasy football purposes and everything else? Like, do I want more pay-per-view games? Do I want more people? Do I want them shut out of watching these games? Or do I want them to see them so that they're...
The more people are shut out, the bigger advantage you have as an observer of these games.
That's what I'm...
Because everyone's consuming the echo chamber of the description of the game.
And then to my game that I would want to watch, I want to watch the Houston-Baltimore game.
That's my second. Yeah, that was my second.
Of all the choices, I'm just curious whether Stroud is going to play up or whether Lamar is going to melt down. But to this KC Buffalo game, everything about me says Buffalo has to win this game. Kansas City's like a half a Eagles collapse to the end of the season, a wounded, a bad team masquerading into the playoffs. Everything says Buffalo. I damn well know Kansas City's going to figure out a way to win this game somehow, some way, whether it's with referee assistance or whatever. Like, I'm so afraid to bet against Kansas City in this game. It's scaring me. But everything tells me I want to be on Buffalo. Except for my gut is trying to tell me, don't do it. You're going to get burned by Mahomes the second you go against him in the playoffs.
This one's tricky. And the reason why I think it's tricky, the KC has a really good defense, and that's what's kind of like stopping me from betting on Buffalo. And Bills are, I mean, Josh Allen could be reckless with the ball. Like, if you told me in the beginning of the season that I'd be looking at this KC defense with the same lens that I see now, and I see Pacheco just killing it on the ground, and you're telling me that the Buffalo defense is completely depleted, like, this would be a no-brain bet. It's just that the KC offense, specifically Kelsey and the receivers, they've just taken such a step backward that I don't know if the offense is going to adapt to the new I don't know that Andy Reid's going to adapt his play calling to the new version of the Chiefs, which is they should probably be a little more run heavy than in the years past and let Pacheco and the defense carry them in this one. I don't see that happening, though.
I don't think KC can dial up offense like they used to be able to, but Buffalo is more apt to dial up offense when they need it in the year 2024.
I don't disagree.
That's what's got me on Buffalo, but I know damn well.
I mean, they even let
City's going to somehow figure out to win this game.
Steelers were in that game, by the way. I know
Steelers were in that game.
It was a 7-point game in the fourth quarter. And you know, that's the problem. Like, Buffalo can't put teams away, but they pack a punch. Like, if KC gets down 21-0 or something like that. I don't know that they have the firepower to come back. The only reason why I think they might come back is Buffalo just will do stupid things, get a pump blocked or something, and that's how they'll come back. But if Buffalo falls 21-0, like I have confidence that they would come back in that game. Like they throw big punches, big swings, like they have that capability.
This game may hinge on whether Rasul Douglas can really go or not. Because
he
one of
would
the
go on
reasons they
Rashee
struggled,
Rice.
there was no Rasul Douglas last week against Pittsburgh.
Mhm.
And then they started losing other guys like they did earlier in the season. The Buffalo defense was getting as good as Kansas City was, and then this last week or two, Buffalo started to get in there. I mean, they were down to getting people out of the stands to play middle linebacker against the Steelers. So this is one you have to watch the injury reports to get a real feel for whether Buffalo's going to be at maximum defense or whether they're going to be have an arm tied behind their back.
And last thing before we pass it to Chris, because we haven't heard from him, this is Mahomes' first road playoff game ever. Not just the first time he's going into Buffalo. This is his first road. Like, take the Super Bowls out, obviously. Let's not count those as road playoff games. Everything's been in Arrowhead. So I think that's an insane stat and something to definitely keep in mind.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting talking point. I don't think that Mahomes is going to be phased necessarily being on the road in this situation. But my thought on the game was my numbers come Buffalo. So again, I was a little shaky on them, but I tend to trust them, especially in a game that's a coin toss to me. I did have the thought that Andrew was describing of, I don't even know if I don't really have that strong of an interest in betting either side of this game. But for the last ticket to be punched to the championship game, this is a nice one to sit back and just enjoy. I know more Bills fans than I do Chiefs fans, so that would be the side I'd be rooting for in terms of like just the people that I know that would be happy if they made it to the next round. But my big question about this game, where I don't have an answer yet, is what RC hit on. I know that there was a lot of guys missing or leaving the game for the Bills, so I don't think Josh Allen and the offense can carry, a wounded defense. I think the Bills are the ones that are. You talk about Mahomes' first road playoff game and stuff like that. The Bills are the ones with that need to get over the hump. That if this is a tight game, it's the Bills that have the history of winning this game in the regular season and losing it in the postseason year after year. And it would just be another loss for a different reason and completely disheartening to the franchise. So they're the ones that are I think, are going to feel the pressure and start tightening up if this thing stays close. And that's where you need a full strength defense. You need everything every advantage you can get to stay in the game. That's what worries me for the Bills.
I'm only watching it to see who the Texans are going to play in the finals.
Yeah, exactly. The Texans, they're going to be making their travel plans shortly after the end of this game.
Had it not been for a weird offsides call on Kadarius Toney, this game would have been in Kansas City.
Yeah, forgot about that.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Well,
and for as bad as Kansas City has looked on offense the last half of the season, it took to Chris's early point. It took minus 30 temperatures to get the Kansas City offense flowing again. So that was the best Kansas City has looked in a while. I know Miami had half a defense, but
Buffalo might as well. They might have that too. And and that's the thing where you look at the Kansas City offense isn't that good, but their defense is pretty good. So it allows you to run the ball. It allows you to be more patient. And if you have a couple of drives where you don't score, the defense can continue to keep you in the game while you make adjustments and, not get into panic mode. So that's, as I said, my numbers come against Kansas City, but if the injury report doesn't support it, then I'm out on either side. If Buffalo's injury report looks good, I would consider playing them. But to one of the earliest things that was said, I think RC, it is tough to put the bet down against Mahomes when the line is under a field goal. Because, Andrew, like you were saying, that last game, the Tony offsides, that was the Bills having the lead, the Chiefs getting the ball back with roughly 2 minutes-ish left on the clock. And they went right down the field. I mean, they got it called back, and then the Bills stopped them. But it was, I expected Kansas City to win that game. I was surprised that the Bills were able to stop them.
And there was no Isaiah Pacheco in that game, by the way. I know I keep harping on him, but I think he's going to be a really big piece of the puzzle come Sunday. And
especially when they have no linebackers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we saw him have. I mean, he didn't put up like 150 rushing yards on Miami, but we saw him take advantage of that depleted defense. Like, I'm seeing a similar situation here. It's almost a replica of the weather conditions and the defense that he's going up against, where you have Buffalo kind of depleted. Miami had street defensive players. Bruce Irvin, Jason Pierre-Paul was starting for the Dolphins on last week.
Yeah.
Thinking of how 50-50 that we are on this game made me have a weird thought to propose. If you could only have one bet or the other, there's two options. You have to take one of them. Would you rather take all of the underdogs this week or all of the favorites to try to get 3 out of 4 for the profitable week?
So with the point spread, would you rather have?
Yeah. Would you rather have all 4 underdogs, be forced to bet on all 4 underdogs, or would you rather be forced to bet on all 4 favorites?
Considering that I'm on 3 of the favorites, I'll probably go with the favorites, but this is the only underdog this weekend that I like, but it's more of this one's also more of a pick than a best. It's somewhere in between I would call it a bet. I'm reasonably comfortable with the Chiefs. It's not like the Baltimore-Houston game where I'm not comfortable at all.
These are some big lines for playoff games this week.
Yeah.
Usually double-digit lines.
Round, though.
Yeah.
This is the round for favorites.
Yeah.
Historically.
Double-digit lines usually don't do, like, the favorite usually covers that. Not that we have any yet, but like the 9.5s on SF and Baltimore are pretty close to double digits. But
well, that's interesting. I saw a stat on that this week where you're right. The double-digit favorites in the playoffs since 2011, 12-1 against the spread, and if they're coming off the bye, 7-1 against the spread. Mm-hmm. But get this: if you take playoff favorites between 6.5 and 9.5. That next corridor below that, 13-29 against the spread, 31%. And in the division round specifically, with the bye in the first round, 6-14 against the spread. If you're favored by 6.5 to 9.5. So it's tricky because you're probably going to see the Niners are going to get to 10. So they're going to jump from the negative subset to the really positive subset in the next 24 hours.
9.5's just so close to 10 that it's like, I don't know.
It's as close as you can get to 10.
Yeah. Yeah, seriously.
I mean,
I'm waiting for it to go to 9.9, then I'm going to pull the trigger.
Lay the 9.9. No, that next corridor, Chris, you're right. Like that swings like crazy to the other side, but if I had to like pick one game getting to 10 between the Texans, Ravens, and the Packers, Niners, I think the Niners are going to close well above 10. I think it could close like 10.5, 11, something along those lines.
Last year in the divisional round, favorites were 2-2 against the spread. The favorites that were minus 6.5 or more favorites were 1-2.
Wow.
That one little small sample size from last year means the world, but it made me think to go back and look. That was Kansas City winning that game against Jacksonville that got shaky. Mahomes sprained his ankle.
Yeah.
It was a 9-point spread that they won by 7, but Jacksonville had their chances. The Eagles were the ones who were big favorites that blew out the Giants. Buffalo was a 6.5-point favorite, lost straight. It got rocked by Cincinnati. We all had that last year. And then San Francisco was in another one that I think we all had. Was San Francisco was only like a 3.5-point favorite against Dallas and didn't play their best game, but ended up beating Dallas by 7.
By the way, I pulled up that Dan Campbell stat. So when Detroit were home favorites this year, they covered at 4-1 against the spread. The only loss they had against the spread was that Thanksgiving game against the Packers when they just come out and shock people. And one other thing I want to throw out for Detroit, I know we want to kind of stick to Buffalo KC here. Last week was the first time they've ever won in the wild card round. All their playoff wins have came when they were in the divisional round or higher through bye week, which is pretty cool. So shifting gears back to where we were with Buffalo, Kansas City. Do we like any props in this one?
All right, I just found one. I just found a prop that is not for this game, so I'll save it to the I'll save it to the end. But I think it's interesting, clever.
The props.
I'm about to put a lot on it.
Okay, well, we can end it on that. Not this game prop, but for this game prop, what I'm looking at is Dalton Kincaid and Khalil Shakir, with Diggs fading the second half of the season under the new offensive coordinator, and drawing L'Jarius Sneed, who's one of the hottest corners in the league right now. That's a volatile combination that's going to leave Josh Allen looking elsewhere, just like last week. And Gabe Davis is not going to be there. So that bumps it down to Kincaid and Shakir as his two most likely options. So I like the Kincaid over the Shakir. When I looked earlier, Shakir wasn't even on the list yet. They may be waiting for official word on Gabe Davis. But Kincaid was like 30 yards or something. He should get that by halftime. I think Buffalo drafted Kincaid just to face Kansas City to show them they had their own Kelsey, and this is the time for them to not put the demons of Kansas City in the playoffs behind them. But if they do it with their own tight end, because it's usually been Kelsey thumping them, that will be a nice moment for the Bills.
I agree. I like both of those plays a lot. I think if Davis is out, Shakir is someone that you definitely want to look at for the reasons you said. Like L'Jarius Sneed, he's really freaking good. I mean, there was one play in that Miami KC game. It was a coverage bust where Hill basically, got one long touchdown. But other than that, I mean, the KC secondary held him down to, I think only like 60-ish yards. So Sneed was obviously a big part of that. I mean, Diggs is nowhere near the level of Tyreek Hill. Like you might want to bet his unders.
His game against Kansas City earlier in the year, 4 catches for 24 yards on 11 targets. That's not a low targeted, we went away from them. They tried to get it to him. They just couldn't. Kincaid ended up being the second most targeted at 8, and James Cook 5 passes in that game. A high mark for him for the season. Gabe Davis came through with no catches on 2 targets, as he does.
Yeah,
but he's not going to play. He's not going to play this game.
Gabe Davis is either no catches or he has like 5 catches for 200 yards and 2 touchdowns.
He's when he has that, it's against like the Eagles or the Lions pass defense. It's never against anybody who's any good.
Yeah. Chris, we cut you off.
Well, no, I was just looking at receptions for Dalton Kincaid. So RC, I was wondering when you were mentioning Kincaid, was it yardage or receptions that you were
Yards.
focused on?
What's his? I would say that if
So I'm
they
looking on
set his line
DraftKings.
at if they set his line at like 3.5 receptions, I would definitely like the over on that. But I was looking at yards.
Okay, well it's 4.5 receptions, and it's juiced to the under. Over 4.5 is plus 105. So that would be the 5 receptions that he got last time these two teams played on 8 targets, and the yardage is 40.5.
The 40.5. I was saying 30, but
And I don't
40.5, and I think he's beat that number 3 weeks in a row. And I think the reason it's at 40 is leading up to when they switched over to the new offensive coordinator. He had a bunch of just nothing games, like 5 yards and 15-yard type games, and then all of a sudden they discovered him again the last 3 weeks. So I think they're averaging maybe a basket of his last 5-6 games, where that would draw him to the 40, but his last 3 games he's blown away that 40. And then without Gabe Davis being there is just another benefit, and with Stephon Diggs being wiped out by Snead, it's just another benefit that all roads point to Kincaid.
Yeah.
So do you? I mean, unders are generally the best way to play, but it doesn't sound like you want to go directly after the Diggs under 61.5, or do you?
No, because I know. I mean, if this game goes a certain way and Buffalo really has to ramp up the passing, Diggs will find a way. I respect Diggs enough where I acknowledge how cold he's been, but I just don't want to poke the bear, which has been wrong for several weeks in a row. Could have won all of his unders probably for several weeks, but I always just blow right past Diggs,
Well, I'm going to
giving
keep
him
an eye on it.
respect that maybe he doesn't deserve.
Well, I mean, he can deserve the respect, but if Snead is able to lock him down, and if he is matching up on him, and that is Snead's game, he doesn't just stick on one side. He's going to have Diggs. He clearly must have been the first game for Diggs day.
He'll mostly follow around.
And I wonder, is there any, because Kincaid's numbers are not super high, and they are in some places juiced to the under. Is that because Knox is back? And I say that just because Knox scored last week, and now it's playoff time. So
I think that there's a gravitational pull that if they're looking, they won't just look at the last game or the last 3 games because it's too small a sample size. They'll go back 6 or 7 games, and he's had 3 hot games and 3 ice cold games in his last 6 or 7. It just so happens the upside ones, the winning ones, are the last 3 weeks. Something has shifted in the last 3 weeks with the way that Buffalo's gone about their offense, and it points towards Kincaid. And then Gabe Davis being out puts more pressure that they have to go to Kincaid and Shakir, but Kincaid probably more than Shakir.
And keep in mind, if you just compare to the Pittsburgh game last week, Buffalo was never really, even though Buffalo kept the game close, they were never really under pressure trying to chase Pittsburgh. So if they get into a situation like that where Casey gets on top of them, I think you can see a lot more Kincaid targets and Shakir targets more than what we saw against Pittsburgh.
If I was attacking Kansas City, I'd want to attack them with the tight end.
It's about the only thing you can do against them. They're really good defending running backs and receivers.
I like the idea of the Kincaid pick was made with beating Kansas City in mind. So that is a weapon that you can count on them using. That's why I like the receptions over 4.5. So you got to get him to 5. But that is the number he had last time, second on the team in targets in that game. And you were talking about there's a catalyst for him to be needed because Diggs has got the best coverage against him, and he is the weapon that they're they're looking for. I'm just peeking at the first game. The over/under was 49, and in this game it's 45.5. So when we're looking at player prop unders, I think it's interesting to look at the fact that we're talking about a 4.5 point lower total in this game, which is pretty significant difference in totals for the same two teams.
I would guess between the weather and as bad as Kansas City has fallen on offense, that's what's pulling it down.
Yeah, and probably the Bills' injury report will either keep it anchored there, or maybe perhaps it'll raise it up if we get a bad report from the Bills. All right, so if I can throw out so this is unfortunately this is going to be one of those deals that's only on FanDuel, so it'll be a little bit limited. But as I was poking around, I saw under playoff specials there were. It wasn't under playoff specials. It was playoff props, and you can pick the individual players. So as I mentioned, I really like the under 53.5 for Rachaad White this week. Well, they have under receiving, rushing, and passing yards for all the players left for the entire playoffs. So Rachaad White is 144.5 rushing yards for the entire playoffs. He's already got 72 of them, which leaves us with 72.5 for the rest of the playoffs. So even if, let's say, he gets 30 yards in this game and they happen to win, you still have another 50 to play with next week. And if
against San Francisco,
against San Fran, who's got a great rush defense. I mean, this is one where this is one where it's so good. I would say if you beat me on this one, you can have the money. But I'm talking about 72 more rushing yards for Rachaad White in these playoffs. If it happens against the Lions, well, that is completely unexpected because you're talking about a really good run defense. And he could have a poor rushing game. Tampa can win, and he can still not make it next week.
Yeah, I don't think that's crazy at all.
I don't trust him. And Detroit being the number 2 run defense by yards during the regular season, and San Francisco being number 3 is just too much for me to rely on Rachaad, who just never has any holes, never has anywhere to run.
You know, and I was on board with Team Rachaad in fantasy football, and RC, you know, halfway through the season, we were talking about how many RB1 games he had, and there was only 3 running backs who had more RB1 games than Rachaad White, and he was a sneaky good player. But for the whole season, he's been hamstrung by a really poor offensive line, not a lot of usage, and it just seems like game script is not going to be on his side. If he happens to bust a 60-yard run, then hats off.
It'll be the first time this year it happened.
And I would say I've lost worse bets than that. You know, it's not that you can't lose it. It's that we're really putting our money in at minus 112 or the odds that they have there. 144.5 yards, as I said, 144.5 is the total that he would need to exceed. And in the first game, he had 72. So that leaves us with 72.5 more rushing yards that he can go for. So that one I like, in addition to some of the ones we mentioned already. I'm going to make that my best bet of at least for props. I'm going to make San Francisco. So San Fran minus 9.5 as the side best bet. But I got to say, I like the Rachaad White one even better than San Fran, I think.
You're going to make RC cry betting under Rachaad White like that?
Uh-huh. Well, I know you. I mean,
fantasy football's over with, so.
Well,
hey.
Now we just want Rachaad White to sandbag himself for next year so we can draft him again.
Hey, he can go crazy with the receiving yards. He can catch a ball, take it to the house, and he's done that several times this season.
That was my thought, Andrew, and that's why I was specifically asking about the receiving yards, because if they're coming into this game saying you're one of our best players, we need you involved, and we're going to get you involved in the passing game. No,
Todd
Those
RC,
words have never been spoken by
RC,
Tampa
yeah,
Bay this
RC.
whole year.
Yeah, I was just saying if by some crazy, yeah, I was impressed that the Tampa Bay coach knew that he was going to a dome. So now the sky's the limit. You know, he might say, hey, and also I have Rachaad White and we're going to throw the ball to him.
You might want to take Baker Mayfield rushing yards over Rachaad White. You probably get pretty good odds on that.
Head to head?
Baker but head to head, Baker
to
run
have
for
more
more
than
yards
Rashad.
because he will not yield the ball unless he's throwing a bomb or running.
Chris, I have an idea. Fly to Vegas, do the redo when you were there in the summer. We'll live stream you and then convince the Circa people to give you odds on that.
You know, they are open to listening to ideas of odds, but I don't know if we can get it done this week. It looks like I was just peeking at ESPN real quick. Kingsbury likely to talk OC job for the Bears
with the NFC North favorites of 2024.
Yeah.
That'll be interesting. Did he coach Caleb Williams at all in college, or?
I don't think so.
Okay. Yeah, they wouldn't intersect. He was in the NFL when they were in college. I don't know why. Like, I saw an article like drawing the connection between the two, and
he was an OC there, but I don't. Maybe he was the OC. Caleb Williams' first year.
I think Caleb was in Oklahoma when he was the OC. I could be wrong.
Okay.
I'm not 100%
This is
sure.
the second year.
Is this Caleb's second year? No, this is Caleb's second year, I think, in USC. He had 1 year in Oklahoma with Lincoln Riley.
See, all roads lead back to a draft show.
Yes, we're getting there. I wonder if RC is going to bet against Caleb going number 1. I guess the listeners are going to have to wait and find out about that.
Not after I got burned by Bryce Young.
Yeah, at least you were
CJ
right.
Stroud.
Hey, you were right, though.
Ain't right if they take my money on me.
Yeah.
I'm a 0 for 2. I'm on Stroud and Kenny Pickett bets, so don't bet against me, whatever I say. But I haven't even really this upcoming week. I cracked the books on the quarterbacks. I started with the wide receivers this year for the first time, starting with wide receivers, just because everything seems to be about Marvin Harrison. So that intrigued me. So I wanted to do Marvin Harrison as the first one of the year. And then the other top guys by comparison will come out one by one.
I like that, RC, and I'm sure the people listening to this are very curious to see where you have Marvin Harrison. But looks like Chris left, and this might be a good time
about.
He got pissed off at you with Marvin Harrison, but
I reminded him about the Kenny Pickett bet.
Yeah.
From 2022 and.
Yeah. But I think this is a good spot to close. So for those listeners out there, thank you so much for watching this podcast. Please be sure to subscribe. Go to ffmetrics.com to see RC's site. Get access to all the best fantasy football content, handicapping advice, draft content, which is upcoming. You got a little preview here. And definitely check out Chris's Bet the Close podcast on Spotify. Thank you guys so much. Best of luck with all your betting endeavors on this divisional weekend. And we're